So if you've actually taken the time out of your day at some point in the past to examine, for example, Gallup's opinion polls or other such statistics, what you will find is that people tend to be much more moderate on the issue of abortion than they're generally given credit for. You've got a lot of pro-life people that make exceptions where circumstances place extreme hardship either upon the mother or her unborn child, and you've got a lot of pro-choice persons who do believe that abortion should be generally accessible so that the operation is available in similar such situations, but who nevertheless don't believe we should allow abortion to become a birth control operation as it currently has in, say, the United States. But if you watch the media, especially if you're watching Fox or MSNBC, or if you're reading newspapers, then you're going to get a much more caricature, dichotomous depiction of what the abortion debate looks like. So they're going to interview a lot of hardliners, people from organizations that are more extreme than the people they claim to represent. We're talking about representatives from the American Life League or more extreme pro-choice organizations such as NARAL or Planned Parenthood. And if you've at all familiarized yourself with the American Life League, you know that this is an organization which believes that abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. Similarly, if you've ever looked at what Planned Parenthood's policy on abortion really is, you'll find that they want abortion on demand without apology. And if we're honest with ourselves, truly honest, that's just a euphemism for birth control abortions. They have very openly stated that they think women should be able to obtain abortions for whatever reasons, as frequently as they choose, as many times as they choose, and it doesn't matter. There should be no questions asked. So if a woman wants to obtain abortion simply because she doesn't like the way condoms feel, she's completely within her rights and we should allow her to do that. If she wants to obtain an abortion because she doesn't like the racial characteristics or the genetic characteristics or the gender of her unborn child, she should be allowed to do that, and it's nobody's business. She's completely within her rights to terminate an intended pregnancy simply because she's discovered that there's something about this child that she doesn't like, or because she doesn't want to go through the trouble of prenatal care, or for any other reason. It doesn't matter. Planned Parenthood supports abortion in all cases. So what we find here is that these organizations and these individuals who get media attention don't represent their respective constituencies, but they do express a lot of rhetoric which comes to represent the individuals within the pro-life and pro-choice movements. And as a result, we hear a lot of these comments about how in order to be truly pro-life or truly pro-choice, you have to support abortion or oppose abortion in all cases and in all circumstances. And I don't believe that this is actually the case. So in this video, that's what I want to discuss. I want to discuss the ways in which individuals can maintain ideological consistency while at the same time making certain exceptions to their dispositions. And I'm not encouraging these exceptions. In fact, I disagree with many of the exceptions, especially ones like incest, which seem to be entirely irrelevant and utterly silly to me. But what I'm saying is that it is possible for you to hold this position without being illogical or without sacrificing consistency. In 2008, for example, John McCain was criticized for his position on abortion by both sides of the debate. And the pro-lifers were angry at him because he made exceptions where there had been a pregnancy which resulted from rape. And pro-lifers as well as pro-choicers claimed that this was ideologically inconsistent because the rights of the child shouldn't be influenced by how this child came into being. The fact is that a child who has been conceived from rape is essentially identical to a child who has been conceived from consensual sex. There doesn't seem to be any morally significant difference between these two. So how can you say that you believe abortion should be allowed in cases of rape but not in cases of consensual sex? Well, pro-choice persons tend to take a very pessimistic approach to this because I think it's ideologically convenient for them to demonize pro-life persons, but also because I think that there are some legitimate misunderstandings. A lot of pro-choice persons are under the impression that pro-life people just want to punish women for having sex. And of course, pro-life persons, like pro-choice persons, generally agree that women aren't responsible when they have been raped. So the pro-choice characterization of this is to say that the pro-life people who make this exception are making that exception because they don't believe this woman has done anything wrong. On the other hand, they still want to punish the women who have consensually had sex because they have done something wrong. And while that actually is one way to be ideologically consistent and make the exception, I don't think that's the actual thought process going through most pro-life persons. I've talked to a lot of people from both sides of the debate, and it honestly doesn't seem to me that pro-life people want to mandate parenthood as a form of punishment for uninhibited sexual activity. While they do want to mitigate uninhibited sexual activity, it's because they want to discourage things like teen pregnancy and abortion, not because they're trying to punish anybody. Now, the truth is that it is possible to want to restrict abortion in cases of consensual but not unconsensual sex without wanting to punish anybody. And the way you do this while maintaining ideological consistency is simply to discuss jurisdiction. Let's step away from the issue of abortion for a moment and look at a separate circumstance which can illustrate this point. Most people agree that there is a fundamental right to life. Now, we disagree about whether or not the equal protection of this right to life should be extended to our prenatal population, but we do agree that it exists, and pretty much everybody believes that the government has an obligation to uphold and protect that right. So, for example, if somebody wanted to come in and murder me, the government would have to intervene. It would have to protect me. But in this case, it has the jurisdiction to do so. I'm a United States citizen, so the United States government has the authority, and in fact, it has an obligation to uphold my right, to protect me from being murdered, from having that right violated. On the other hand, if this were an incident which was occurring with Mexican citizens in Mexico, most of us will probably say the government doesn't have the authority necessary to protect that individual victim's right to life. We can't just send troops into Mexico to stop every murder from occurring. We don't get to. Now, if we could prevent those murders from occurring, that would be a very good thing, but unfortunately, the government doesn't have the authority to do so. Here we can see that we believe that in one case, the government has the jurisdiction necessary to uphold an individual's right. It can protect me. But in another case, it doesn't have the jurisdiction necessary to protect an individual's right, the victim in Mexico. So that's not ideologically inconsistent. And you can apply the same thing to abortion. You can say that in cases of consensual sex, the government does have the jurisdiction because the woman's activity has created a duty to act. She's the one responsible with the father for creating this dependent. So just as you can force the father to use his body for manual labor with which to generate income so that he can make child support payments, you can tell the mother, look, you've created a duty to act. You've made this dependent. Now you have to use your body to provide for that dependent. On the other hand, whenever we're talking about pregnancies which have resulted from rape, the mother hasn't created a situation such that in order to exercise her right, she must violate somebody else's right. So there's no grounds for restricting that. There's no grounds for saying that there's a duty to provide care or to sustain this dependent. She's not responsible for the creation of that dependent. So this would no longer be comparable to making a man pay for his child. Instead, it would be like making a man pay for somebody else's child. Thus, when you say that it's inconsistent for a pro-life person to make exceptions in cases such as rape, what you are essentially saying is that it would be equally inconsistent to tell a man that he can be made to pay child support for his child, but that he wouldn't be made to pay child support for some other child who is equally in need of support. So, from a libertarian perspective, I think that it's possible for a pro-life person to make exceptions to his or her overall position while still maintaining ideological consistency. And when we're talking about the pro-choice position, I think something similar is true, but that it's a little different. Because where pro-life persons can maintain ideological consistency by approaching the abortion issue from a libertarian perspective, I think that pro-choice persons have to step away from the libertarian perspective and take a more moralistic or societal type approach to the issue if they want to make exceptions without being inconsistent. So, for example, if your argument for abortion is the bodily autonomy case, if it's something similar to the violinist thought experiment, to the drowning child situation, the baby in the box situation, or something to this nature, then I think it would in fact be inconsistent to say, well, she shouldn't be able to obtain an abortion because I don't like the reason that she's doing so. That would in fact be a contradiction of the libertarian ideology that you've used to justify allowing the operation in the first place. However, if your approach is more moralistic or eugenic, it's quite possible to say that in circumstance A, we should allow abortion because it's merciful, but in circumstance B, we shouldn't allow it because it's not. Let's say that you believe that abortion should be reserved for cases where the child will be born into a life unworthy of living. For example, the mother was raped and will hate the child. The parents don't want the child, so it'll be tossed into a broken system. The child's parents are extremely poor and can't afford to provide proper care. There's a medical deformity or complication, something along those lines. Well, then you could say that you allow abortion in these cases because you're sparing the child from a lifetime of suffering, but that you don't allow it in other cases where a pregnancy has resulted from consensual sex and there's no other complication, because you're not putting the child into an environment which will cause it to suffer. So in this way, it's possible for both pro-life and pro-choice persons to make exceptions to their overall position on the issue of abortion while maintaining ideological consistency, if and only if they're approaching it from the appropriate justifications.